This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horror, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with Lor Gislason and Shelley Lavigne about their new book, The Flesh of the Sea. Returning champion Lor Gislason, he, is a non-binary writer of body horror from Vancouver Island, Canada. Their recent works include the anthology Bound in Flesh, an anthology of trans body horror, the collection Sick, Stories from the Goop Troop, and the novella Inside Out, which we discussed on episode 47. Shelley Lavigne is a purveyor of moist, usually queer, horror. They live in Ontario, Canada, and use their science degrees for unintended purposes. You can find their stories in Scissor Sisters, The Dread Machine, If There's Anyone Left, and Sick, Stories from the Goop Troop. Welcome to the show, Lor and Shelley.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
I have an icebreaker question. How does Goop blend with the gushy stuff?
Goop is a very personal thing. It can be different for everyone. I think it's very viscous for me.
Mm-hmm. And I think gushy stuff can also, for me, be emotively producing liquids, whether there's a couple different ones, you know what I mean here.
Any emotion that produces liquids is the gushy stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good or bad.
Yeah, good or bad, yeah.
All right, I think that's everything I need to know. So Shelley, thank you for coming on the show. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, your background in horror?
Sure. I have been a horror fan for a really long time. It's actually been a weirdly connecting tissue for a lot of my friendships throughout time. I was thinking about that the other day, that like sometimes I'm like, wow, varied bunch of folks that I have made friends with over time, but horror has been sort of that uniting thing. I think for me, especially being a trans person and a queer person, the idea of the abject and how it features into horror is sort of something that really connects with me. How it is in a lot of ways also the sort of outsider. It allows you to sort of deal with that feeling of being unsafe, which you kind of feel in your day to day, but in a you're unsafe in a safe way. It's a safe place to experience those anxieties and those fears. And I think that I just really connected to that, especially being an anxious person. Sometimes my mind creates these scenarios of the worst case possible scenario. And this is really just a place for me to play with that and to actually channel that into something productive and to even explore sort of the things that I struggle with, the sort of darkness in people, the sort of complicated feelings I have about myself, about, you know, the good and evil inside of all of us, that I think is a place that I really want to explore.
And how did you and Lor meet up?
Oh, do you want to take this, Lor? I can go.
So our mutual friend May Murray had a call for like a horror writer support group, and it was just like a little Zoom get together. And me and Shelley both joined it. I don't know how you found it. And then, I don't know, just like from the first time we met each other, there was something about Shelley that just like drew me to them. And we have a lot in common. And we talk every day. And I don't know, it's like weird to think about that there was a time that we didn't know each other now.
Yeah, Lor feels like family, sort of in the most positive sense of the word. It is weird to think about the fact that there was a time before our friendship, because I think that I derive so much joy and creative fulfillment from our relationship.
You have a background in biology?
I do, yes.
How has that informed your horror writing?
Oh, in a big way. I think especially with Flesh of the Sea. So I actually have a master's in evolutionary biology, evolutionary ecology to be precise. And it's all about how the environment causes changes in behavior or in physiology of life. A big part of that is sort of learning about evolutionary ecology, Darwin and all of those things, how changes in an environment cause changes in organisms. I'm like simplifying this quite a bit, but that idea of how Darwin traveled through the Galapagos and discovered all of these different animals and created his theory of evolution through natural selection. And when Lor was sort of explaining this idea to me of like, oh, pirates with an ecologist sort of going through, and I was just like, oh my gosh, okay, well, I have all these ideas. Okay, you're gonna have to sort of like, don't forget to talk about the Royal Society, and don't forget this, and don't forget that, and oh, and this, and because it is still like a passion of mine. While it's not something that I landed in for work, it's something that I know a lot about and do still kind of hold dear. So that background of like understanding how all of those trips through the Galapagos and how that contributed to science informed in a big way this novella. But I also think that it also shows up a lot in a lot of my other stories. There's a lot of scientists, there's a lot of ecology, there's a little bit of environment as well. And there is like a knowledge of human bodies and playing in that as well through my learning.
Let's just dive into the project. Shelley, I think on your site, there's a really great pull quote from Gislason Lavigne, past guest.
She said, it's Robinson Crusoe meets Our Flag Means Death in this epistolary, gay, goopy, swashbuckling adventure. In the flesh of the sea, Lavigne and Gislason expertly craft a story of separated lovers battling great regret, longing, and a maritime world of grotesquely beautiful creatures. This tale's tentacles will wrap you tight and leave you begging for more.
Yeah, she crushed that. Not only did she summarize the book very well, but she sells it at the same time. Like, I really agree with every word of that blurb. Lor, did you have the germ of this idea and then you brought it to Shelley?
Yeah, so Andrew of Darklit Press was like, hey guys, I'm starting a series of pirate novellas, sort of like a splatterpunk series where they're all different stories, but they all have the theme of pirates. I was basically like trying to pitch my idea to Shelley to see if it was any good so I could show it to Andrew. I think I was thinking about like the old Dr. Dolittle movie with all of the sea animals and this kind of a fish out of water almost with our main character, Wilford, being thrust into this situation and dealing with creatures that people refer to as gods that may or may not be. And they were like, what about this? What about this? And I was like, why don't you just write it with me? So thankfully they said yes. And I think honestly, it would not have been nearly good without their constant ideas and encouragement. And I think we have a very good back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that this novella is greater than the sum of its parts without any hesitation. I think that we brought out the best in each other. I think that we played to each other's strengths. I am so incredibly proud of what we did together, truly.
What was the collaboration process? Did you guys each take one character or did you trade off in chapters? Did you both scream into voice dictating software?
We started with putting us off into chapters like, oh, Shelley's going to do this one about wasps and I'm going to do this one about worm. But then we would like go over each other's chapters and like add things. And it was very much always editing it constantly as we wrote. So we got to the point where we were like, did you write that? Or did I write that? Like, I don't remember. Like there are a couple of times where you left a note, you were like, that's so funny. I can't believe you wrote that. And I was like, no, you wrote that.
What a great idea.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, we both wrote both characters. What kind of happened is Lor wrote like a little, like the first part of the first letter. And the voice was so clear in my head because Lor has such a good grasp of character voice. It's truly amazing. It's very colloquial and comfortable. So I read that and it kind of helped me also really understand the character. And then, yeah, we kind of sat down and we planned. We had these intense planning meetings where we would like talk for hours and hours and just try to like lay out like, okay, here's an idea for this monster. Here's an idea for this monster. Okay, here is this and here is that. I think, again, we played to our strengths of like these are the things that I want to write about. And then these are the things that Lor wants to write about. And then let's just weave it in together. And yeah, the back and forth, the like constantly editing each other's stuff was really awesome too, because I think that created a uniform voice actually throughout. We've weirdly had a lot of folks like comment on the fact that it read sort of smooth and like you couldn't really tell who was writing what.
It's funny because the people that beta read and blurbed for us almost had like the opinion of like who wrote who, and there were people that were like, oh well, Laura obviously wrote Wilford and Shelley wrote Jean because he's French, and we were like, not really, like just because this guy is French doesn't mean the French person wrote them. Like obviously you contributed, but like there's a bit of both of us in each of these characters.
Yeah.
It feels very cohesive, like one person wrote it, but there's 2 books worth of adventures in it. They're island hopping or they're encountering sea monsters every step of the way, from myth and cryptozoology and things like that, all with their own weird evolutionary ecology spin on it. It was such a blast because every letter back and forth was a totally shocking new development. The hermit crab was so awesome. I used to collect hermit crabs, or I used to be a hermit crab owner. I have a deep and abiding appreciation for them. I really appreciated seeing the hermit crab love.
It's like one of the coolest monsters I think I've just ever encountered in my whole, I'm so obsessed. I'm still so obsessed. I still think about the hermit crab monster all the time. And I'm like, that was
I think you wrote most of that one. But yeah, I really like the idea of this giant creature sort of taking something man-made and making it its own.
Yeah. And I think deals, now that I'm talking about it, I'm thinking about it, displacement and making a home for yourself is kind of like a theme throughout. And I think that that's kind of the monster that echoes that sentiment in a big way. So maybe there's like a thematic link there, but I think I'm pushing it a little bit too far.
It's your baby.
If the hermit crab had better people skills or more tender tendrils, it could be like the goddess and have a crew of worshippers around it that would transport it back and forth. It just decided to take the other route. It was really interesting how there is competition even on that quasi-mythic cosmic horror species level. There is a mystery in the center of the story, but it feels like this is obviously just an unconnected series of dots as they hop around this antiquated map where there be monsters in all the blank spaces that the Royal Society hasn't been, but it's all beautifully connected by this back and forth between these 2 lovelorn characters. And then you realize, no, the clues have been there all along as to the central mystery of the ship. And then you get to a point where the letters aren't connecting anymore. And you create that break where the audience knows what's happening, but the characters are no longer informed on each other's whereabouts or their safety. And then everything is coming to a head in a way that is so propulsive, which you wouldn't think possible from a series of letters slowly flitting back and forth across these various oceans. I devoured this whole thing in like a couple settings. It really, really was fun. Just fun, man.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I think we had a fun experience writing it. It's nice to see that also translates to readers too. That's really, thank you for saying that. That's really sweet.
Yeah, I agree that fun is like, I think that's a major component in just like my stuff in general, because comedy, horror, and that kind of lightheartedness is a big part of me as a person. So it's just always in my work.
Yeah, I'm more the sad, whiny one. I think that
it's funny though, because I wrote more of the sad, whiny bits, I think.
I know. That's what's weird, because I think you wrote the really whiny Jean Baptiste parts that were like really not whiny, like really like lovelorn, the pining, the like intense desire. And I was like, dang, Lor, like you are pulling out all the stops. This is amazing.
Was there any research or mythology or pseudo history that you guys fell back on? Because I know at the time there was a hot market for these sort of fake almanacs and histories where people who would be merchants sailing to new lands could just make up whatever bullshit they wanted, and then people would eat it up when they got back home. Like, oh, on this island, all the people have dog heads. And people are like, well, all right, well, now we know what's going on in that country. Like, there's all this weird stuff that was in these illustrated manuscripts or that was published and traded that made up this blurry boundary between the known and the unknown world at that time. Did you guys dig into that at all?
I think I had a bit of the background just from my own knowledge of that, and also like my fascination with horrible taxidermy. Because the thing is, they would kill the animal, preserve the skins, and bring it, but they wouldn't have great photography, all those things to try to recreate those animals, which is why you get some truly spectacular specimens, if I do say so myself. And also you sort of see, like, I've seen some of the art of like explorers then coming back and trying to sort of describe what they've seen to artists who then try to capture that, and you're like, well, that is not what that animal looks like. Elephant does not look like that. Hippopotamus does not look like that. But
that tree doesn't eat people.
I mean, yeah, maybe ours does. Yeah. But yeah, I think it was more like the background knowledge. Lor, did you do any extra research?
No, I think there were a couple little things like I looked up. We have a little bit of it set in Oxford, so I looked up what kind of plants they had there during that time, because I was like, would they? But I don't think ours is historically accurate. And a lot of the creatures were inspired by like video games and stuff, at least from my end. So I think also we had a discussion with somebody, because we use basically grenades at one point. They were like, grenades weren't invented then. And I was like, I've seen them in pirate movies. They must have been, right?
They just stuck a fuse in a coconut and let rip. I saw it on Gilligan's Island. I know the professor invented something like that, right?
They're there somewhere.
Yeah. Instead of putting the lime in the coconut, we stuck a fuse in the coconut.
It's interesting how at Oxford they were studying moths and things like that. And then just across the sea, you have all these fantastic nightmarish creatures. And it's like there's no understanding. Do you think that is what it was like in Darwin's age, where he was seeing things that no one had seen, or rather that no one had recorded, and he was bringing back this wealth of variety and information, and people just thought it was insane?
Well, I mean, I think not just him. I mean, I think it goes back to this whole, like, people were going to Africa and seeing animals that people in Great Britain just were like, that doesn't sound real. And I mean, some animals that you even see now, like in Madagascar, still feel like, wow, how does this even exist? But I think that I can't call myself necessarily like a historian of that time, but there was so much that was unknown by scientists of that area, right? Like, not just the people who were living in that area knew of all of these animals, but the people in the UK did not necessarily, because they didn't have that exposure. I can't necessarily say that this was like exactly what was happening, but I think to some degree, there was kind of a surprise of, like, especially with seeing all of these different, like the finches was just not something that they had exposure to. These species don't exist in the UK, so they wouldn't have really had any context for them.
A bird could never have a beak that short. That's impossible.
Why?
Birds eating nuts? What?
I wonder how they describe giraffes to people back then. Like when I don't know, the Brits went down to Africa and they saw a giraffe. How did they describe that to people back home? Because even now it's just a crazy animal to think about.
Yeah. how long that neck is. It just, you're like to the artist, no, make it longer. And the artist is like, really? It can't possibly.
No,
Come
no,
on.
keep
It's
going.
that thing where the artist already started drawing and he's like, well, it's not going to fit on the page.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not starting over.
Yeah.
Do you know how expensive paper is? What was so interesting at that time, though, was we might look at an animal and say, how did this evolve? How is this possible? What function or what fitness does this convey on the organism that would preserve these traits? But back then, before the work had really been done on natural selection and these other evolutionary principles, there was a more religious understanding.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, these creatures cursed God, or a saint was walking one day and he saw these people and said, if you don't convert, I'm going to turn you all into dogs. And so you're going to be a bunch of dogs walking upright. They had a much more fluid understanding of how animals got to be the way they were. So I'm sure they would find things like crocodiles and elephants stunning, but I don't think it was like beyond the scope of their imagination because they believed some pretty wild things.
Mm-hmm.
But also they had their whole church doctrine of as above, so below. And they're like, well, we know there are lions on land, so there must be lions in the sea. And we know there are fish in the seas, so there must be fish walking around the land. And you get all these great medieval bestiary drawings of like swordfish in little boots, bopping around.
You gotta love marginalia in medieval texts. So good. Yeah. Yeah.
Enough about the creatures. Let's talk about the people. Lor, do you want to tell us a bit about our humans?
So our two main characters are Wilfred Bowen and Jean-Baptiste de Beaupre, and they are a English and French pair, respectively, who went to Oxford and Wilfred studied snails, and Jean studied moths, and they had this friendship that kind of was something more, but they both didn't really know how to talk about it. And John gets accepted into the Royal Society for his research, and Wilfred does not. And he sort of wants to prove himself both to Jean and also everybody. So he's like, I'm going to go on an adventure. It's more than he bargained for.
Oh, yeah.
It starts off with this great missing chapter and this disconnect where they can't or won't remember what happened between them the night before Wilfred's sudden decision to jump on the next passing ship. The characters slowly work their way into describing what happened, exploring the feelings. You realize that if they had just had some open communication, all this could have been avoided. But the price for saying certain things out loud, they can't even write them down for a very long time. It's this really great thread that runs through the letters back and forth. And it adds stakes to every letter in a way beyond just what horrifying monster are we going to encounter on this island or on that ship.
Like I consume a lot of stories, and that could have just communicated is definitely always a very frustrating sort of thing when you see that in a story and you're like, oh. But I think that in this case, Wilfred especially was really not in a place to face that part of himself, was still very much sort of wanting to conform to the rules, seeing sort of a path for himself that really was I will fit in with society. I will follow the path. I will go into the Royal Society. I will do what is expected of me, and kind of sees that as a path to success. And I think he needs to break free of that. And to do that, he needs to leave. I don't think they could have ever really talked to each other. Had they stayed, they would have been stuck. And I think by the same token, Jean-Baptiste is also paralyzed by his own fear and anxiety and needs to have a push to do something more. And I think that they needed to break free of society in order to face those parts of themselves because it was really holding them back.
Do you think that your background in evolutionary ecology informs the story and that these men could not thrive in their environment. And it wasn't until they went into a new ecosystem that they could adapt.
Wow. You know what? That might have, but that might have been subconscious, but I 100% think that that is probably what was running in the back of my head as this was going on. But I don't think it was planned, but yeah, especially now that I'm sort of talking about it, of like having to break free of their space in order to see things differently, act differently. The environment needs to act on them in a different way for them to change their own behavior. That's deep. That's really deep.
Now you can bring that up in all the next interviews. You're like, well, you see, it all goes back to evolutionary ecology. It occurs to me that Wilford wouldn't have been chasing around after scraps of murdered monsters if he had just brought a Pokeball. This whole thing would have been in the bag.
Yeah, I know, right? I guess, I don't know.
Megafinch, I choose you! That was the only part of the book that lost me, was when he went to the different trainer gyms and was trying to level up the monsters he captured. It's like, Lor, I know you like video games, but come on. Shelley's trying to do a thing over here.
I should write down like what their Pokemon teams would be. That'd be fun.
That would be fun. Yeah, I would like that. That would be funny. But I guess you really kind of see there that there is like we really sort of met in the middle of kind of our interests in a way. And it's kind of neat to see that blend as we're talking. I'm seeing more and more connections, and I was like, wow, I didn't even see that before.
What if Pokemon but sad?
Yeah. And gay.
So you had a notebook full of a bunch of monsters that you wanted to hit. Was there a particular sequence of encounters or even pirate tropes that you guys were trying to roll out in a certain way?
The planning stage for this was actually like probably more elaborate than any of the other things that I've written. And I'm a big planner. But what essentially happened is that we kind of put them in an order and saw what made sense in terms of escalation and how to raise the stakes. Because we start off pretty bananas, but then we kind of get more and more. And I think too, it was blending in to a certain degree how the emotional progression was going with how what the encounters were themselves, and trying to sort of tie in like, okay, but how are people feeling at this point? What's the progression between Wilford and his shipmates, and what's the progression with Jean-Baptiste and all of those other things too. So that was the big thing. And it wasn't, the piracy is kind of light in this one.
Yeah, I like if we're totally honest, that's like not really that important to the book. I don't know. Maybe it's just like the setting or the time period, but yeah, the piracy part is very small. I think there's only one like raid that they do, and it is like offhandedly mentioned.
But it does raise the stakes because Wilford is either going to be hung when he returns to London, or he has to come back a conquering hero with all of this evidence that is going to completely overturn the natural sciences. And so every time they encounter a monster and it slips away and he can, scribble some stuff in a letter, but no one's going to take him on his word. So that accusation of piracy that's hanging over the whole journey really does propel plot and character.
Yeah, I think it's like the piracy action is minimal, but the stakes of the piracy are still there. And I think too, you're really right in saying like he digs himself a further and further hole as more and more slips away from his fingers, and as he gets further and further entangled in this, it starts being harder and harder to break free. And does he want to by the end?
Do you think you will collaborate on another book, another sailing book, a Pokemon book? What are you guys thinking next?
We'd like to, if we can, continue this, because I think we tie up some mysteries, but there is a possibility to do more. I think it's going to depend on how this does, how our schedules are. We're both pretty busy people. We've got sort of a lot of irons in the fire, but we have been collecting some information on the side when
Yes.
ideas strike.
Our little note stock called sequel. I think that if we did do something, I think it would be just a duology, because that seems kind of important to the characters and stuff. But yeah, that is like an eventual thing. But I mean, I'm positive that we're gonna do something together anyway, because that's we're just connected to each other's lives so much that it's just inevitable. And I mean, maybe we'll do another Goop troop someday. So
I think we're entangled, we're quantum entangled, and I think that it would be impossible to pry us apart at this point.
So I usually ask authors about their favorite local monsters, but I want to know, what is your favorite sea creature?
Oh, I know one. Okay. I'm going to talk about the anglerfish because I think that they're really cool. And it's also like a favorite story of mine to tell people. So as much as I really love biology, I think that this is a big can of worms that I'm opening right at the end. I love to do that. There is a lot of sort of like gender essentialism in some aspects of biology. I think that like if you dig further into it, which I sort of did later on in my studies, it becomes sort of like gender is very much a spectrum, and it very much is, and biology stands by that. But here I go, and I'm going to tell you a story about like male-female dimorphism with that in mind. Okay, here we go.
Probably the biggest swing you're going to find is anglerfish.
Yeah.
I know. So anglerfish are a deep sea creature that do bioluminesce. They have a lure in front. I'm sure that a lot of people have seen these before, you know, the big teeth. They're actually not that big though. Like I think we visualize them as quite large, but yeah, they're like a soft ball kind of size. And they swim around in the dark. And those big creatures that we're used to seeing with the teeth, those are actually the female. The males are quite small, and they swim around. And once they find a female, they bite onto her. And enzymes dissolve every single organ in their bodies except for a pair of organs. Does anybody want to guess what pair of organs remains? It's the balls. It's the balls that remain. And so essentially the female will have like little males attached that feed her sperm so she can produce babies. And I think I've always found them very sort of just a funny creature. And yeah, I know with all my talk of like of biology and like transness and all that, I still it's a lovely story that I love to tell people, and I literally told it to some people this weekend to some laughter. So I really do love the anglerfish.
Wasn't it like they were like, why can't we find the males of this species?
Yeah. They were like, oh look.
They're right here the whole time.
Yeah.
And I love that they can have multiples, so she just has a whole bunch of little balls stuck to her.
Packets. Yeah.
My favorite sea creature is sort of a double-edged sword because it is my favorite and also it terrifies me. It is the big fin squid, which has a very, I forget what do they call the squid head, like a mantle? It's a very big mantle, and then it sticks out to its arms totally straight and then down, and it has these crazy long legs, and people don't really know how it feeds. It just kind of sits there, so you either think like it catches stuff as it floats by. All of the pictures of them are absolutely terrifying, and it just looks like the scariest thing you've ever seen in your life. And they are also a deep sea creature, way down there. And then recently I saw a video of one, and it was caught in a current, and it was spinning around, and it was so wee. It was just a little guy, and it was like, oh no, I can't get out of this current. And I'm like, oh, now it's not scary anymore. Now it's adorable.
I love that there's still so many mysteries to the sea and to creatures, the marine creatures like eels. We don't know how they reproduce. There's so many of them. But the big question is like, what does eel sex look like? We just don't know. We keep wanting to explore the stars, but there is so much just under the water, like waiting for us to sort of explore, not to sort of sound like we need to now go down there with subs and disturb the sort of marine ecosystem. But there's so much we don't know, and there's so much wonder down there. And it's kind of baffling sometimes to think about the fact that we live on this planet and there's so much undiscovered stuff.
Lor, are you familiar with hagfish?
Yes, I love the hagfish. Are like I don't remember what exactly is the thing inside of them that makes the slime.
It's very, very tightly wound enzymes, when released into salt water, explode outward and just become gallons and gallons and gallons of viscous, choking, noxious slime.
The amount of
Yeah.
slime they create is just absolutely insane. Like,
Do you have a hagfish tattoo? Be honest, Lor.
I should. I really should. I'll add that to the list.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a worm and a couple other things, but yeah, I need to add some more weird creatures.
Individually, what projects are you guys working on next?
Mine right now, I can't talk about yet, but I do have something I'm going to be able to announce really soon that I'm really excited about. Here's a spoiler. I hope people have checked out some of my recent pubs, because one of those pubs is going to get to see an expansion I'm really, really looking forward to share with people, but I can't really say a whole lot more than that.
I am working on an anthology with Little Ghost Books at Bookstore in Toronto called Little Guts. Where I am curating a bunch of gross, fun, goopy stories. Very, very me. So I've been reading a lot of those right now. And I have a couple of short stories in the works. And The Flesh of the Sea does have a release date, July 11th.
Excellent. So July 11th, where can people find the book?
It's going to be available for Amazon pre-order pretty soon. We will share the links with you. Hopefully we'll get those up before the episode comes out. But right now, though, we can share that the first 11 pages are available for free online if people want to check that out and see if they are interested in reading more. I think it's a great sort of sampler of what you're in store for.
Yeah, I was hooked in the first few pages, so genius putting those 11 pages out.
Good.
That's your anglerfish lure. Couple free pages.
Come, eat, yes.
So, Shelley, where can we find you online?
I have a website, shelleylavigne.com. It's SHELLEYLAVIGNE.com. And I'm also on Twitter at Shelley's Ghoul.
And Lor?
All of my social medias are Lor Maggot, and I have a website that is just lormaggot.ca for easy access.
So smart. So smart.
Thank you.
Well, guys, thank you for coming on the show. This was a fun read and a really fun conversation.
Thank you for having us. Your insights into the book were quite bang on, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. So thank you.
We'll have to hook up for when you guys write the sequel.
Oh,
Yes.
Please subscribe and follow. Links are in the show notes. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular. I found some anglerfish testes and I surgically implanted them in my throat, which is why I get these dulcet tones.
yeah.